Hello there, and welcome to Overview of a Trance production, featured at www.creatingtrance.com. Throughout this series, we will be covering many different techniques and styles of trance. Today, we will be using Reason, as it is one of the most preferred digital audio workstations for electronic music production. As you can hear it in the background, I have a very simple loop playing at the very beginning of this particular track. We'll get to that in a moment. First, I'd like to start with the sequencer. All of your MIDI notes and automation live in here. If you have automation set for an FX plugin, you'll also see that in the sequencer. You can organize it however you want with regards to color and location. Up at the top, we have a couple of tools to choose from, such as the eraser, splicer, and marker. We'll get to those later in the series though. An important part of the sequencer tool that I use often when composing music or even just trying to find ideas for trance is the loop. With your mouse, you can move the loop points wherever you need them. You can turn it on and off by pressing L. You'll see at the bottom of the sequencer that loop will light up in blue when you're pressing L. This makes it easy to build something without the track running away from you. Kind of keeps it all together in one spot. At the bottom of the window, we have all of our controls, which are the exact same controls found on the bottom of the rack view. All of the standard functions such as click, or metronome as most people call it, the pre or count in as most people would call it, is also helpful when you have a MIDI device attached. Next to that is the BPM count, timing, playback and record controls, loop controls, and at the far right, the regroove button, which we'll be covering much later. Notice the organization I have here. The colors and the names are all laid out so that they're easy to read and understand. This is always a good practice for any producer to get into the habit of, because there are times where you'll have to dive back into a really old project, and if nothing is named properly or color-coded, it might be a little overwhelming, which will put a damper on your creativeness. Trust me on this one. Okay, take a look at the instruments on the upper left in the sequencer. I have a couple of Thor instruments, a piano, an arpeggiator connected to a Thor instrument, and a couple MPC instruments at the bottom. Now let's move to the rack view, which contains each instrument and FX plugin along with their settings. This is where you would add instruments, effects, and even an audio channel, which we won't be dealing with in this particular episode. I have everything collapsed to keep it organized, but let's open up the master section at the top and the two Reverb FX channels beneath it. Click on the Show Insert FX button on the master section to reveal all of the mastering tools. Here we have the equalizer, a stereo imager, a compressor, and a maximizer. These are used to compress and lift all of the sound up to the standards that you're looking for, such as radio quality, getting the song loud enough to play on standard car stereo speakers or earbuds from your iPhone or your Bose headphones. That's kind of what this section does. It gets everything loud enough. For this track, and really any kind of dance, club, electronic dance music production, we're opting for about +4 decibel units, which is about standard radio loudness. There is a big meter that you can open above the master section in the hardware interface by expanding the interface and then bringing up the big meter and setting it to VU plus peak mode. Those are volume units. This lets us monitor the ceiling volume up into the red. Don't be alarmed about the red. This is just how Reason reads out with mastered volume and still adheres to how a lot of the analog equipment worked way back in the day. The best part about Reason is flipping the rack around using the tab key. This is where Reason excels past most other digital audio workstations. You can grab a cable and route it wherever you like. This provides for a very experimental atmosphere to help create the exact sound that you're looking for. If you end up with hundreds of cables and you can't quite make out the routing that you've set up, you can press K, which will only show the cables routed through the selected device. This really helps, trust me. You can also right-click on a cable port that has been routed yet and select where it should go instead of dragging cables around by hand. This is really helpful for the really long cable runs and more advanced projects where there's just stuff everywhere and you don't want to be running a cable across like 30 things. Alright, so we have these two Reverb FX plugins, the RV7000 routed into the FX Sends 1 and 2. This allows us to route many different things into the same exact reverb channel in order to keep the sound clean and without having to add multiple reverbs to multiple instruments, which just makes everything really messy and muddy. It keeps the sound consistent. There are a couple of techniques that Trance will utilize within the FX Send with regards to reverb and delay, but we'll get to those techniques later. Let's flip back around with the tab key and collapse both RV7000s and the master section. Beneath those, we have our mixing channels and instruments. Let's move towards the bottom where the MPC is running the loop that you can hear in the background. This is called the Kong instrument. Normally the mixer channel is on top and the instrument is on bottom. To add effects to a specific instrument, you'd expand the Show Insert Effects button on this particular mixer channel. In here I have added a filter, which does a number of different band passes, but I normally stick with the LP12 setting, which is the default. You can get some really awesome sounds out of these settings, depending on what kind of low-end or high-end cut you're looking for. Some people use them as a quick EQ, other people use them as a resonating effect for build-ups, and for softening the reverb from a drop, which is kind of the way that Trance uses this. Pressing tab again will reveal the back end of the Kong instrument and the fact that it's routed into the mixer channel. You'll also notice the insert effects routing that leaves the mixer channel, routes through the filter, and then back into the mixer channel. You can literally put anything in here to change the initial sound of the Kong instrument or any other instrument. This is just the one that we're working on right now. How would we add effects though? Well, Reason has an inspector that can be called up simply by pressing F8, or if you click on Window at the top menu bar and then select Show Tool Window. There are 4 main sections: Device Palette, Sequencer Tools, Groove Settings, and Song Samples. We'll be spending most of our time in the Device Palette. There are 4 tabs here: Instruments, Studio Effects, Creative Effects, and Utilities. Let's go through the instruments first. At the top, we have 2 different kinds of drum machines: the Kong Drum Designer and the Redrum Drum Computer. The Kong is more modern with some built-in mixing tools that you can utilize and lets you induce pitch blending and has external routing in case you need to split the samples into other mixer channels. The Redrum Drum Computer is more of a loop-focused trigger instrument that lets you also send your sounds out to another mixer channel. They both differ in a handful of ways, and I use them both, but for very different reasons. Beneath that, we have the Thor Polysonic Synth. This is my favorite synth. It's the newest in the series of Reason instruments and has the cleanest, most modern sound and is loaded with a plethora of controls on the inside. This is the instrument that we'll be using for most of this track. The Subtractor and the Maelstrom are both very good and have some really good templates to get you started. The ID8 is more of a complete digital synth with a piano, organ, bass, synth, even drums, and some others. You could literally compose an entire track with just ID8 instruments. More on that later though. Inside of the studio effects, we have the RV7000 that you saw earlier, the Neptune pitch adjuster, 2 different kinds of guitar amps, the M-Class tool set that we found in the mastering section, the RV7 reverb, DDL1 delay, distortion, filter, chorus flanger, phaser, unison, another smaller compressor, and another smaller 2-band EQ. We won't go into any heavy details outlining each and every plugin as they are fairly self-explanatory, and we'll be using a lot of these down the road. In the creative effects, we have a pulverizer demolition, which really smashes audio if you're looking for more of a hardcore and present sound. The Echo is a really advanced delay plugin that has a really nice feature called the roller, which we'll cover in a later episode. It's one of the most awesome automation triggers, though, that I have found in Reason. The alligator filter gate uses rhythmic filter changes to add rhythm to a stagnant chord or sound. It is a very high-tech gate. We will also be using this a little bit later. The scream for distortion is exactly what it sounds like. I typically use the tape setting on this plugin to add a little bit of an edge to the sound if I need it. The BV512 vocoder is also fun to use when there are lyrics that can be routed together with another instrument, which is how vocoding works. In the Utilities tab, we have a combinator, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can drop many different instruments into the combinator, in which the MIDI notes on the sequencer will trigger all of the instruments at once. This is good for mending a bass line and a lead together to make one instrument. It saves a bit of time and also sparks lots of creative ideas when combining different sounds together. Beneath that is the magical RPG-8 monophonic arpeggiator. This utility device attaches beneath any instrument and comes with its own sequencer lane for MIDI input. This is one of the most crucial components of trance and most other electronic dance music production. We'll dive into the details of this one soon. Beneath that, we have a matrix pattern sequencer, which is used to program specific sequences that branch off of an instrument just like the arpeggiator does, but in a very specific way. We'll touch on this one later too. Beneath that, we have the Spider audio merger and splitter and the Spider CV merger and splitter. These are both used for splitting and merging signals. Beneath those, we have the mixer that was used as the main mixing instrument in older versions of Reason. And although we don't really use this utility very often, it can still be really helpful when you have a group of signals that need to be leveled out properly before they are even routed into the main channel strip mixer. Beneath that is a line mixer, which I prefer over the Spider audio merger and splitter, mainly because it has volume and pan controls which can be automated. Beneath that, we have the standard mixer channel and audio track. When you add one of these, a new mixer channel strip appears. Don't worry about the rebirth machine. We won't be using that throughout these tutorials. I keep talking about the mixer, so let's take a look at this last piece of the puzzle, which is the almighty mixing board. If you're familiar with how a mixing board works, then you'll be right at home. Each mixing channel or audio track in the rack view correlates to a channel strip in the mixer. From the top down, we have gain, compression, gate, EQ, which includes low pass, high pass, and specific frequency controls, FX inserts, FX sends, stereo width, stereo pan, mute solo buttons, and the volume control, or fader control, however you want to call it. On the far right, we have all of the master controls, including a master compressor towards the top that we always want to use when mastering audio inside of Reason. We will go into detail about all of this in a later lesson. So, what is trance? Back in the 90s, the genre emerged from Europe in many different club scenes around the same time that house and drum and bass came along. The tempo normally ranges between 125 beats per minute up to 160 beats per minute. Today, trance is a very widely known genre that has spawned many different subgenres, such as vocal trance and progressive trance. Most of the time, trance is in 4/4. It's fairly simple when it comes down to the beat. The main structure consists of progressive building that involves more instruments layering into the sound every 4, 8, 16, or 32 bars. There are normally sections that, once a good build has occurred, all of the low end is cut out and the highs keep opening up while a midsection will slowly fade in. This is kind of the trance sound. It's a very uplifting sound. A lot of the technique behind the dramatic sound is that most of the time the chords are written in minor scale and have a very, very low attack so that the initial sound is drawn out, slowly revealing itself. Most instruments are sidechained to either the kick track or an MPC instrument that is located inside of the insert effects and connected to a compressor using a low threshold and a high ratio, giving the pump sound that we all know very well. Most of the music theory consists of simple melodies that don't stray too far away from the root note. generally using rhythm between octaves or even simpler blip sounds to fill in between the beat. Later in the track, normally during the trance section, the uplifting third or fifth chord hold, we'd reveal a chord combination. This is kind of the tail end of the trance section and kind of has the dramatic uplifting effect that trance is known for. Some tracks use 2 chords, some use 3 or 4 in many different types of revolving combinations. Melodic arpeggiation is also one of the most important features in trance, normally moving at the 1/8, 1/16, and even the 1/32 rate. Arps can go up, down, down and up and down, all around. They can even be randomly generated, though normally we don't use the random setting in trance. They can be programmed to run the entire bar in increments of 1/16, including an off rhythm that generally adds up over the course of a couple bars. The arpeggiator excels when you look at the sequencer with fractions in mind. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to set up an arpeggiator, and you can even automate the arpeggiator to change throughout the track. Bust reverb control is a technique that a lot of DJs use both while playing live and while in the studio. This is when you have a reverb tail that is very present and long, and you use a filter to control it, either closing it up or opening it up. Adding resonance to the filter will bring out the effect even more. You don't want to add too much when the filter is opened up, because it will be a little painful on the ears. So you got to find the happy medium between the resonance and the filter control. This is a very good technique for helping build things up or slowly softening out a crash. It really adds a room around the entire sound of the track. The bass line is also very important, but is always fairly simple to lay out. You have to really think simple. Most of the time it stays on the root note and the rhythm is based off of the locations of the bass notes. You'll see once I let the track play all the way through. Bear with me, we're almost through this. The MPC is obviously an important part of trance and normally features a 4x4 rhythm kick with a clap that lands on the second and fourth quarter notes. It also features a hi-hat that is normally spaced in between the second and quarter notes, 2/16, 6/16, 10/16, 14/16, and you see what I'm saying. Most artists also put in other percussion elements in the off timing, such as 11/16 and 15/16, but you'll hear that soon. Low attack synths are also a very common instrument that trance producers use. Most instruments don't have a really low attack, but you can always go into them and turn the attack up, which actually lowers the initial fade in of the sound. The more attack that you add by turning it up, the slower the sound will fade in. And if you turn it all the way up, it takes a while for the note you hit, and you have to hold the note down for it to actually start to build. There are also instances of mod wheel and pitch blending that are used as transitions and or effects. Sidechaining is also probably the most obvious trait of trance. A sidechain takes a sound and instead of sending it through the standard mixer channel, it's forced into another instrument and in turn cuts out the sound from the other instrument, creating space. You'd use the compressor for this. They have a built-in sidechain. Some people split their drum track into 2 signals, one for the mixer and another for a sidechain, but I normally drop in a redrum into the insert effects and plug it into the compressor, which gives me full control of when I want the sidechain to occur. This is a little bit more work, but again, it's way more control over your sidechain, which I think in the long run opens up more creative avenues down the road. Transitions are very big in trance, both in the builds and in the drops. The builds normally have a filter that is slowly opening up on a reverb bus, and the crashes normally have the same bus slowly closing up, kind of like steam being released. Lastly, mixing and mastering trance or any kind of electronic dance music requires very low volume mixing, normally between -30 decibels and -20 decibels. Once you have everything leveled in between these ranges, then you'd use the tools in the mastering section and the master compressor in the mixer to bring the levels up to the +4 decibel units. seen in the big meter in the hardware interface. Now that I've explained the overview of what a trance track is and how it is to set up in Reason, let's sit back and take a listen to this production. Notice the builds, the drops, the hang time, the arpeggiation, the uplifting piano, and how advanced the chords get after the second build-up section. Enjoy.